Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you're coming from. Thanks very much for joining the webinar this afternoon. So today's webinar is all about accessibility. And of course, the big question is, what is accessibility? Well, it involves designing systems to optimize access for as broad a spectrum of users as possible. Accessibility means giving equal access and opportunities to everyone. In the case of Ingenta Connect, in the case of platform design, this involves reducing and overcoming the barriers that might occur, for example, in the display, in the user experience, making the platform tools as intuitive as possible, and employing assistive technology, which helps users to do something that they would otherwise be unable to or may have difficulty with. Here at Ingenta Connect, for example, we recently introduced Read Speaker, a simple-to-use screen reader which enables visually impaired users, or those who might have other difficulties in physically dealing with text, or people with dyslexia, to access texts to read on screen without having to download any additional tools. But of course, we as a platform provider are only half the story. We rely on content from around 250 independent academic publishers. Today, Alistair McNaught from DISC will discuss how you as publishers can help to remove barriers and help authors, production and editorial staff produce content which is as inclusive as possible in terms of access. Alistair's role is to advise on how organizations can use technology to maximize accessibility. This involves best practice in supporting disabled learners, but also involves creating better experiences for all learners and indeed staff. Alistair has spent 20 years in the classroom as a geography teacher, 4 years in full-time staff development, and then 10 years with JISC TechDisc, which was the leading UK advisory service on technology and inclusion, before embarking on his current role as JISC subject specialist in accessibility. We're delighted he's able to join us today and thank him very, very much for his time. I will now hand over directly to Alistair McNaught. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Right, good afternoon or morning or whatever time it is. And well, what I would like to do is to start off just giving you a bit of an overview. You will all have an idea about what accessibility is, and you may have slightly different ideas from one another. What I'm going to focus on is accessibility in the real world, the reading experience for real students in the real world. So I'm not going down a route of you should do this because of the legislation, or you should do this because of anything else. What I'm looking at is you should do this because it makes your product better and easier to read. In terms of what I want to achieve in the next half hour, I'd really like you to be able to have a student eye view of ebook accessibility. Recently, I was in King's College London with a group of library staff, disability staff, publishers and aggregators, all working together, just being students. I set them typical tasks that a student would do, and I got them looking at their own platforms, their own products through the university's website, the university's library platforms, etc. It was an eye-opener for many of them, because as familiar as you are with your own product, you're not necessarily fully aware of what that then looks like by the time it comes through various library systems and your student then tries to consume it. So these are what we're going to look at today. We're going to understand some of the variability that students experience. We're going to also, as we go through, we'll be showing you some typical assistive technology workarounds, because even if your platform doesn't have some inbuilt facilities, there are ways in which you could advise your users so that they could get the sort of functionality they might need. More on that later. That's a little treat later on. So this is the big issue that a reader in a university experiences, and in fact a reader anywhere, but particularly in a university context. when they get online, they've searched for their books, they end up with a lot of variables. They'll have the offer of perhaps, do you want to read it online? Do you want to download the PDF? Do you want to download the HTML file or an EPUB file, depending on what's available? Where do they find out about which they might want to download? Where is there any guidance that says to them, if you want to maximize your color changes, be able to change background colors, etc., then download this format. If you want to be able to navigate effectively through the system, then using heading levels or chapters, then do the read online instead. Normally there is no information available on that, but it's a choice they have to make. They also have to make a choice on whether or not they download the entire book or just a chapter, or whether they look at the entire book online or just a chapter online. And then if they've decided they're going to download, there are all sorts of options like, do I look at my chapter in the bespoke interface? Do I use Adobe Reader? Do I use digital editions? Do I use Bluefire Reader? Will it come up in a browser? I might have chosen the PDF, but it loads in the Chrome browser. If so, is it just a browser without any plugins like Internet Explorer? Am I better using a browser that's got plugins? Now, with Edge, the latest version of Microsoft Edge supporting EPUB natively, it's a really good time to be pointing your users, your customers, to a particular browser if you produce EPUB, because it gives a very good reading experience, much better than your other formats might. So those are some of the different permutations. There's about 27 realistic permutations that a student or a reader has to work through. Now, what I want to start with is just looking at some of the elements in a little bit more detail. So here's the Ingenta platform, for example. And so that we're looking at is a web page, and therefore in a browser, it will do certain things. Byron's already talked about the listen option, but also in this platform interface, we've got other options. Being in a browser, maybe we can magnify it and maybe it will reflow to fit the screen, so you don't have to scroll left and right. Maybe because it's in a browser, you can use a browser plugin to change the contrast, or use a browser plugin to extract text and present it one word at a time, or loads of clever magical things that browser plugins can do. But it's not just about the platform, because the platform is only one of the ways in which you might be delivering. From the platform, there's the opportunity to then look at the file. That's where you use the platform, you search, and then what do? I decide I'm going to go for the PDF in this case. So there's the platform. That is not a traditional Ingenta looking platform, but I've been using a very simple color contrast tool, a free plugin for Chrome, which allows me to be able to look at high contrast versions of the Ingenta platform, or indeed any other platform. So, or indeed any web-based files that you distribute. So that's something to be aware of. Do your users know that they can do that? Because if you don't tell them, I suspect there's nobody else who's going to tell them. Anyway, so we've gone from the platform, and here on the right-hand side, we've looked at that file in an online PDF. So we've chosen the PDF, it's loaded up online. That's one of the options we have, and that will give us certain options of its own. So for example, I could potentially select some of the text in there and copy it, which could be very useful for a student. But my other option is, I might say I want that PDF, but I'm going to look at it in Adobe Reader instead. And so I decide, in this case, download the PDF. Now, when I download the PDF, I'm going to get a whole load of new, interesting opportunities and potentially some interesting difficulties as well. So first of all, let's look at the opportunities. Here's the PDF. And on the left-hand side, we can see the PDF as it came straight from the system. On the right-hand side, I've been able to magnify it. It's reflowed automatically. I've used the View Zoom Reflow option in Adobe Reader. And using the Edit Preferences Accessibility options, I've been able to change the color. So what you have embedded in your default PDF, if you're lucky, depending on how you've produced it, what you have is already an assistive technology. If you're not boasting about it, then you should be boasting about it, because this is really useful to a lot of students. However, you'd need to test your own PDFs to see whether or not they can do this. Can you take the PDF as it shows in the left-hand version in Adobe Reader? Can you reflow it, view, zoom, reflow, and then magnify it so that the lines continually rewrap to fit the page? Can you change the colors? If you can, where do people find out about that? And then the second second element that I want to look at is that we looked at a really positive benefit just now of a PDF which almost has a default benefit in it, in that it will allow you to change the color. It'll, if you're lucky, reflow. However, it doesn't always work. Here is another PDF that I've looked at, and this PDF, if you see on the left-hand side, the bit I've highlighted says, yet Zeeps has done substantially more, and then it continues, substantially more than reflect critically on children's texts. On this particular PDF, when I reflow it, it appears to reflow very nicely. So you can see there that all those lines reflow effectively. But just look at this bit, yet Zeeps has done substantially more, and then all the text that I've marked in that grey box on the left-hand side has disappeared. And it's only the text at the beginning of the next page that reappears. So that would be a very unusual reading experience for somebody that was depending on perhaps text-to-speech, or somebody that just needs a high magnification and has so magnified it using reflow so they don't have to go left and right. And that's a much poorer experience. Now, the point is, the production methods that you've got, the legacy materials you've got, will all have an influence on what works and what doesn't work. In some ways, the important thing isn't what works and what doesn't work. It's how honest and transparent you are about that information, so that people can prepare, that people can anticipate problems. They can anticipate times when they may need to contact the publisher directly and say, excuse me, would we be able to have the raw PDF, because we need to adapt it for our disabled students, because when we reflow it at the moment, it does this, so we need to go and do something. And then there's another element to it. So we've looked at the platform element. We've looked at a couple of examples of the file delivered through the platform and then opened in a third-party tool like Adobe Reader or Adobe Digital Editions. But there's another element that you as publishers need to be aware of, which is the next step, really, which is, okay, you've been to the platform, you've downloaded the file. There's another step, which is going from the file to the reading experience. And this, as we've seen in the last two slides, depends partly on the production methods. Am I going to get really effective reflow without losing text? Am I going to get reflow, but suddenly a bunch of text disappears? Or what sometimes happens, and I'm not sure why this is, I think it might be to do with the way a PDF is created, either from Word, clicking some of the wrong setting buttons, or maybe even from Quark, if anybody still uses that. But sometimes when you reflow text, you just get all the words joined together, all the spaces disappear, and you end up with a book that might be 400 pages long, and it consists of a single word on every page, and that word is all the other words joined together, which is a horrible reading experience. But it's not just about production, it's also about the author. And this is where you may think about the way you relate to authors, and the way your guidance to authors and your requirements from authors is shaped, because it can make a big difference. So here, for example, you'll notice I've got Deirdre Scherer. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but this is from, I think it's from an article, a journal article, that has really effective headings and subheadings from a typographical point of view. So when I read through that, I can see which is the heading and which is the subheading. However, they are only visual, they are only typographical headings, they are not structural headings, they haven't been tagged as heading 1, heading 2, etc. Consequently, in this left-hand side, down the side there is no bookmark view. If it had been properly tagged, I would be able to see a little bookmark shape. I could click on that, and that would open up a nice nested list of all the headings and all the subheadings, and I could click on any one of them and go to that point immediately. If you're a print impaired reader, or if you're dyslexic, or you have visual difficulties and you're having to read something at very high magnification, maybe if you've got 3 or 4 times normal magnification, your article becomes 3 or 4 times longer in terms of screenfuls. So being able to navigate through it by heading level rather than having to read through the whole thing is extremely effective. But somewhere, either at production or at author level, there was a failure to identify Deirdre Shearer as a heading level 1 or a heading level 2. And instead, Deirdre was put in there simply as bold, italic, 16 point, which is useless in terms of navigation. And here's the second thing. When we look at the bottom of the image, we've got a nice image which is referenced in the text, but I don't know to what extent, because I'm not the author and I don't know what points the author was really keen to bring out of this image. I don't know whether or not somebody that couldn't see that image would have enough of a sense of what the key points were, what are the key markers. So this whole thing about describing images, image descriptions and alt tags is really important. But that is something where you have to think about who is the best placed person to do that. Who is best placed to say, this is a heading level 1 and this is more important than that subheading? Who's best placed to say the main point of that image? If I was to give you, a sentence or a paragraph about the really important thing about that image, it's the author that is best placed to give that. So maybe when authors are doing their authoring and you're at the manuscript stage, that's when those conversations need to take place. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about some of the issues. I'm going to take you through some examples of good. What I'm going to do first, I think I'm going to do this little survey first, and I'm just going to ask you, I think you should see on your screen now, and again, perhaps if somebody could pop in the chat pane, can you see a poll asking about your familiarity with accessibility in digital texts? Can you see that? Lynn's typing. Thank you very much, Lynn. Can you see the poll? You can. Excellent. So I'm going to give you maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I'd like you to just click on whichever of those is most most appropriate to you, and then we'll share all the votes. So once you've clicked on it, I think there's a send or a submit button, and then right. So I should show you all the votes, and here on the screen we've got a bit of a mixture. What's pleasing is that we've got this, perhaps the bulk, reasonably confident in this area. So hopefully what we look at today, especially in the next section when we kind of define what good is, and more importantly, we define how, if you have something that's good, you can help people to get optimum value from that good design. That hopefully will be really useful to you. And well done to the 7%. I'm guessing that's one person who's saying this is core to our workflow. That's excellent. But the elements that are important is not just having good practice in place, it's also making sure that your end users know what good practice they can look for and know what they can expect. So back to the slides. Now, there's a bit of a key on some of these slides now that we see at the top, just to remind you that, and this isn't on the Ingenta platform. In fact, I can't remember which platform this was on, but it's some slides from something I was doing recently, and it sort of shows some nice elements. So I thought I would use those with you. RO is reading online. This is the Elsevier Science Direct platform. I remember it now. PDF B is PDF viewed in a browser, and PDF AR is PDF viewed in Adobe Reader. So I'm just going to show you some things that a student might come across, might see. So on this particular platform, the Elsevier Science Direct, first of all, I had a look at one of the books within the online reading tool, and there are some nice little browser plugins that you can see over on the left hand side there that will pick out all the headings and will recreate the heading structure in a web page for you. So it's actually a brilliant way of somebody being able to read through a navigation at potentially a more granular level than the platform itself provides. So here I am reading through this particular article or this particular chapter in a book, and I can very quickly skim down to individual, almost paragraph level, certainly section levels, research models, and then all those different things. And I can do that not because that functionality has been built into the system, but because what was built into the system was good, accessible tagging. Heading level 1, heading level 2, heading level 3, heading level 4. And so that enables me to use a third-party tool like Headings Map, or there's another one called HTML Outline, and it allows me to then do some really clever things and navigate very effectively. If your product allows you to do that, so if you have your products, your files in HTML format, and you know they're structured like that, it might not be a bad idea to, somewhere in your accessibility statement, give people ideas about how they could navigate very swiftly through your file using HTML5 outlining tools and plugins. Here's another one, because we're online, so it's the OR, online reading. I've also got text-to-speech compatibility. So there are different ways of providing text-to-speech. The most reliable way is the way that Ingenta have done it, where they've actually got a bespoke reading solution built into the system, so you can click on a paragraph and it will read to you. But there are other systems as well, and there are plugins that you can use that may not always work in all circumstances. But again, if you know that your raw files are HTML and are haven't got high levels of DRM that completely disable right-click functionality, then what you can do is what I've done here. I can select a bunch of text, right-click over it. I've got a little plugin called Selection Reader from the Chrome Web Store. Works really well, and it will simply read it out. So this isn't a platform level reading online. This is when I'm now, potentially, this could be me just reading in the browser because I've downloaded the HTML file. And then there are other things, copy and paste support. Obviously, from an academic perspective, being able to clip selections is really important. Now, the problem is sometimes DRM will allow you to copy, but each you do a copy, it kind of does this little message thing that comes up and says, oh, you've now only got 4% left. Now you've only got 3% left, because it's confining the user to a maximum of 10% copy and paste. Now, I'm not going to argue that it's wrong to implement DRM. All I'm going to argue is that people need to know in advance what it's likely to be. So just make sure that you're really clear in your accessibility statements if there are going to be those copy protection measures, because people might need to find a way to work around it if they have legitimate access to the text as a disabled person, and that they therefore have legitimate support, certainly in a UK legal context, legitimate support to obtain that in an alternative format. Now, color changing is really easy to do in browsers. There are various plugins that you could do there. And so again, this is nice. You can see the same content, the same book I've been looking at, but I'm now looking at it in various colors, a whole range of ways you could do that with different plugins. Again, your content may do that, but do you tell people about it? And that's the important question. And then zooming in or zooming out, this can be a bit hit and miss on different platforms. It can be hit and miss on, when I download books in HTML format or journals in HTML format, sometimes it can be hit and miss. But here I'm zoomed out and it's very small on the screen. Some people need that. Some people with visual impairments need to zoom out because their visual impairment may not be to do with clarity and acuity, it may be to do with field of vision. So there are people for whom they're looking at the page through a tiny field of vision, like looking at it through through a kind of toilet roll holder or something. Consequently, they want to get as much text as possible in that, so they may want to shrink it down. Equally, as we see on the next page, they may want to shrink it up because maybe clarity and acuity are important to them. What matters is that whether they shrink it down or shrink it up, they don't have to scroll left and right. And this, as you can see, this is the same document there as it was before, and it is perfectly legible and readable without left-right scrolling in either case. Okay, now I'm going to switch. I'm looking at the same platform, I'm looking at the same content, but because I'm doing a different organization, hopefully it won't make anybody feel awkward, unless you happen to belong to that organization. But here I downloaded from this highly accessible Elsevier Science Direct platform, which works really well, and their accessibility statement's great. I then had a look at their PDFs, and one of the PDFs I loaded in a browser. What you can see works really nicely there is because it was well structured. The PDF had tagging with bookmarks. I can then navigate through those bookmarks. I can also, because of it being a PDF in a browser, I can use some of my plugins. There's all my Chrome plugins along the top. That's what I can use to make a reading experience more personalized and more effective. So here on this slide, I've selected some text. I've right-clicked that first red bar. I've right-clicked, clip it to OneNote, so it helps me with note taking. That second red bar, I've right-clicked and I've got it to read out loud with my selection reader. And then the last one, I've right-clicked and I've got it to Spreed. Spreed is a speed reading plugin which presents that content one word at a time. You can change the font size, you can change the number of words presented and the speed at which they're presented. For some people, that is a really effective way of reading. Again, if you know that your product is compatible with those sorts of tools, what a fantastic way you can add value without actually doing anything more other than being a bit more explicit and explanatory in your accessibility statement. And then just the last few to navigation. Navigation here, I've got that same PDF, but instead of looking at it in the browser, I'm looking at it in Adobe Reader. Navigation works really well. There's the bookmark view, works beautifully. Color contrast changes. PDFs in Adobe Reader tend to do this really well, but if I need a different colored background, dead easy to do, really easy. Copying to other applications, again, that's worked very well. I don't have any problem in achieving that. But just so that you don't go away with the idea that there is some holy grail of accessibility that one of your rivals has achieved, just to show you that absolutely not the case. accessibility is very much a journey. It's not a destination. You're tweaking this and you're tweaking that and you're improving that bit of the workflow, then improving something else. Whilst everything we've looked at in the last 10 slides has been great and really helpful functionality and compatibility for students and other readers, actually, when I try to magnify and reflow this document, it just doesn't work. So I'm having to look at the PDFs by scrolling left and scrolling right. Now, just the last couple of things that I want to look at for you is if you wanted to have a practice with your own product. These are a few tasks that I worked through with colleagues at King's College London in this event I was talking about that I was working on recently. We got a room full of people from suppliers through to end users and people supporting students. And I just set them 4 tasks. And I said, first of all, try the mouse-free access. Open up, go into your platform, and mouse-free access is more to do with platforms than it is to do with the file itself. But go into a platform and without using the mouse, try to get to chapter 4 of any book that you select. Just select a book, go to chapter 4, but don't use a mouse for any of it. Another task, color, contrast, and text-to-speech. Go to any of your files, open them up. Can you change the colors? Can you change the contrast? Can you change text-to-speech? Does your accessibility statement tell you how to do it? Magnification and reflow. Go to any of your files, look at them in the end product, the browser or the tool that they will be viewed through, whether that's Adobe Digital Editions, Adobe Reader, Bluefire Reader, whatever. Just try magnifying it 300, 400% till it's big and see if it reflows. And then the copying, pasting, collating, that's more to do with DRM as well. Now, survey number 2, just to end, we've got a couple of things just before the end. I'd just like to see, you can select more than one thing here. And it may be that some of these you're more familiar with than others. And if you're not familiar with something, just leave it. But I'd like each of you to just say which of these things you think your product can do. So again, I'm going to be silent for a minute or something. And I'd like you to click on the different options and then click on submit or send. One of the interesting things here in terms of the web platform we're using is that those color contrasts on those question options are really, really low. All right, so if you are ready and you've clicked on your send votes, you all done that? Because I don't think the system will collate it until you've all added something. Okay, let's go and see. I'm hoping that will magically appear. There we go. So very interesting that we don't have 100% for any of them, which is interesting in itself because being able to navigate by structural heading benefits everybody. It especially benefits people who are perhaps using a screen reader, blind people, for example, or people with poor visual, people who aren't blind but just needing the text really highly magnified to be able to navigate your way through to a key area is really important. And there are lots of tools that will allow you to do that, like the inbuilt bookmark view in Adobe Reader, or the tools, the outlining tools that you can get for browser plugins. So this is interesting. So we can certainly by chapter, that's common. Structural navigation by heading and subheading, not quite so common. And I'm suspecting that things like color magnification with reflow, marked up reading order, are possibly things that people simply don't know. And so you'd need to go and check. So that's fine. But I think that list is a really important list for you to become familiar with. And the reason for that is because a test is coming. To the next slide, these are the last two slides now. 4th of July, Independence Day, in America at any rate. It's also the launch day for a project that's called Aspire. Now, there are currently, I think there's been something like 15 universities and probably about 9 publishers and aggregators have been working together on this project. It's going to be a crowdsourced, it should say, not crown-sourced project. The Queen has not given royal approval to it. It's a crowdsourced project where we're hoping to get over 100 universities in the UK involved, and we're going to be looking at accessibility statements that publishers and aggregators provide us. So we're going to basically just go to their websites, look for the accessibility statement that tells us about their product's accessibility, and score it. Aspire stands for Accessibility Statements Providing Improved Reading Experiences. So it's kind of quite a nice acronym. There is a link there, that tiny.cc/aspire2018 will take you to all the content that you need to know. It will take you to some downloadable versions of the questions. The questions, when the project goes live on the 4th of July, the questions will be online forms. You are very welcome to take part in it yourself, to judge your own products using those online forms. Other people will be judging them, so you might as well do it yourself. And the scores will then be aggregated and kind of publicized next autumn, or this autumn. And there are 2 elements to this. First of all, there's a separate scoring for publishers as for aggregators, because with publishers, we're talking primarily about files. For aggregators, we're talking about the interface, not the files, because they can come from loads of different people, and the aggregators can't be expected to know all the files. But for each of those, then there's a separate survey, but each survey is going to look at the information and the features. So for information, you may have awful accessibility, but if we can find good information about, yeah, this doesn't work, we've done this, but that doesn't work, unfortunately you can't change the colors, etc. If we can just find clear information on that, you are still going to get a decent score, because it's about transparency and about being able to plan and being able to anticipate problems. But the second part of the survey is about the features. So you might have awful features, been totally honest and transparent, so got a really good score for that. But the fact that you've got awful features might mean that your score for features may not be quite as good as somebody else's score for features, and they had good information and good features. So that's kind of the way it works. But look at that link. If you are interested, on the 22nd of June, there is an online training event where we look through, and this is specifically for publishers and aggregators, we will go through the key Aspire questions, and we'll give you examples of what good might be, examples of what bad might be, and examples from from existing practices that we've seen. So if you have got, if you want to make sure that by the 4th of July your accessibility statement has had a once over and had a little bit more beefing up, to make it a little bit more effective for users, then do join us for that training session, where I'll be taking whoever we got through the questions and giving advice and guidance as to how to maximize score simply by providing really effective information. The last poll was just to get you reflecting on your accessibility statement as it stands at the minute. So some of you may have an accessibility statement on your website that says our website is W3C compliant and all that standard stuff that nobody actually understands. Or normal people wouldn't be able to use that to know what they could do with something. So it might be that you have an accessibility statement about your website itself, but this isn't about your website. This is about your product. So can I go to your website and somewhere I'll find out whether or not your PDFs will reflow, whether or not your EPUBs are available, or whether I should look at your EPUBs through Edge browser, or whether you recommend me to look at your PDFs through Chrome, because then I can make the colors change, or make the text-to-speech work really effectively. So, have you got an accessibility statement? If so, what does it talk about? Does it talk about standards, or does it talk about actual features that benefit people? So I've got 4 options there, and in terms of the Aspire project, the best will be the ones that have features that benefit disabled readers. An accessibility statement should not be about covering your own back and just saying, we endeavour to be Section 508 compliant. It should be about providing useful information that makes the reading experience of a disabled reader, or indeed any other, really effective. So this is the last bit. Give me your votes. So I may have been a little premature clicking then. Apologies if you were still having a think. And it may be quite fairly that you don't actually know, because that's not your part of the system. So, it may be you can't answer that. And I am aware that we've got a range of people with a range of roles. However, if you know you haven't got one, or you've got one, but it only references standards, it's not going to actually mean anything to your typical student or typical domestic reader, then I really think you need to do what that one person who knows that they do reference some features, what they've done there. Number 3, it would be great if all of you could start moving in that direction, because you will get a score, and let's just make it as good as it can be. And that is all from me.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Alistair. That was a very interesting webinar. I hope everyone else enjoyed that as well. Thank you also to all the participants that participated in the polls. It was getting a lot of interesting feedback there, and it was very interesting seeing the different results as a consequence. I hope everyone has actually learned something they can take away with them today. Just so you know, if you want to get some more information from Ingenta, we've got our website, which is www.ingenta.com. We've also available on Twitter, which is @WeAreIngenta. I'm sure many of you know we've also got the Ingenta Connect website as well, which is www.ingenzaconnect.com. And again, the Twitter for that is Ingenta Connect. Anything relating to Ingenta, if you'd like to send Byron Russell an email, he'll be happy to help you and answer your questions from the Ingenta side. Byron Russell's email address is byron.russell@ingenta.com. Thank you very much for everyone for participating. I hope you enjoyed it and can hopefully take something away that you can action. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.